From the moment Luffy was old enough to understand the world around him, his fate had already been set. Unlike in another reality where he idolized pirates and dreamed of adventure on the high seas, this Luffy had a different dream: to become a marine, just like his grandfather, Vice Admiral Monkey D. Garp. Fusha Village remained his home, and Deiden and the mountain bandits still played a part in raising him, but Garp was a far more present figure in his life. Instead of simply visiting sporadically and throwing Luffy into dangerous situations without much guidance, Garp was directly involved in his training. He saw potential in Luffy, an untapped strength that could be honed into something extraordinary. But for that to happen, he had to push the boy harder than he had ever pushed anyone before. Garp's training was relentless. Luffy's mornings began with brutal physical conditioning, running through the dense forests surrounding Fusha Village, climbing rocky cliffs with his bare hands, and lifting heavy boulders that seemed impossible for a child his age. Whenever Luffy showed signs of slowing down, Garp would remind him that a marine couldn't afford weakness. "You want to be strong, don't ya, brat? Then act like it." Despite the grueling nature of his training, Luffy never wavered in his determination. He took every fall, every bruise, and every moment of exhaustion as a challenge to overcome. Garp wasn't the only one impressed by his resolve. Deiden and her bandits, though they often complained about Garp's harshness, couldn't help but marvel at Luffy's progress. Aside from raw physical strength, Garp made sure Luffy learned crucial survival skills. He was dropped into the wilderness and told to fend for himself, forced to hunt his own food and find shelter without assistance. He learned to fight against wild animals, to adapt to unpredictable situations, and to never let fear control him. But the most critical part of his training was Haki. Garp, being one of the strongest marines alive, knew that no one could reach true strength without mastering Haki. He didn't go easy on Luffy in this regard either. The boy was introduced to observation Haki early on, learning to sense his opponent's movements before they struck. At first, it was frustrating. He would often get knocked around by Garp when he failed to react fast enough. But with time, he grew more adept, eventually reaching a point where he could dodge attacks he couldn't even see. Next came Armament Haki. Garp made him practice punching trees until his fists bled, forcing him to push his willpower to its absolute limit. "A strong will is what makes a marine," Garp would say, watching as Luffy pushed himself to exhaustion daily. Eventually, Luffy managed to coat his fists in a thin layer of blackened Haki, marking a significant step in his growth. By the time he was 17, Luffy was far beyond the strength he originally had at the start of his journey in the other timeline. He wasn't just a strong fighter, he was a disciplined warrior, trained under one of the greatest marines in history. When the day finally came for him to leave Fusha Village, Garp handed him his official marine uniform. Luffy wrinkled his nose. "This is uncomfortable," he complained, tugging at the collar. Garp let out a hearty laugh. "You'll get used to it, brat. Now, let's see if you're ready for the real thing." And with that, Luffy set sail on his first journey as a marine. Luffy's first test came sooner than expected. Not long after setting sail with Garp, their ship came across a notorious pirate crew led by Alvida, a minor but troublesome figure in the East Blue. Garp was dozing off in a chair, arms crossed over his chest. When the marine crew informed him of the pirate ship, he merely grunted. "Luffy, handle it. I'm taking a nap." Luffy blinked, looking from Garp to the enemy ship. "Me? You wanna be a marine, don't ya?" Garp cracked one eye open. "Then prove you're not just talk." A wide grin spread across Luffy's face. "All right." Without hesitation, he leaped off the marine ship, landing directly on Alvida's deck. The pirates barely had time to react before Luffy launched himself forward, taking them down with a combination of brute force and speed. His training had made him much stronger than he would have been at this stage in the original story. When Alvida finally stepped forward, wielding her massive iron club, Luffy didn't hesitate. One punch, coated with armament Haki, sent her crashing into the deck unconscious. The Marines on Garp's ship watched in stunned silence. Garp merely chuckled. "Not bad." Among the pirates, Luffy noticed a terrified cabin boy cowering under a barrel. "Hey, you," Luffy called, peering under it. The boy yelped. "Didn't he hurt me?" Luffy tilted his head. "What's your name?" "Kobe." Luffy grinned. "You wanna join the Marines?" Kobe's eyes widened. Emmy? Really? Garp, who had finally gotten up from his nap, rubbed his chin. HMPH. I dunno, brat, he looks kinda weak. Luffy ignored him and extended his hand. Come on. Let's go. Tears welled in Kobe's eyes as he nodded eagerly. For the first time in his life, someone was giving him a real chance to stand up for himself. And just like that, he became the newest recruit in their Marine squad. Their next stop was Shell Town, where they intended to drop off Alvida's remaining crew and report their capture. However, upon arrival, they encountered an unexpected sight. A man was tied to a post in the Marine courtyard, baking under the sun. Who's that? Luffy asked, looking at the swordsman with curiosity. One of the local Marines hesitated before answering. That's Roronoa Zoro, the pirate hunter. Captain Morgan sentenced him to death. Luffy frowned. Why? Garp folded his arms, watching from the sidelines. Why don't YA go ask him yourself, brat? Luffy didn't need any more encouragement. He approached the tied-up swordsman, who looked at him with sharp, unwavering eyes. You don't look like a Marine, Zoro muttered. Luffy grinned. That's 'cause I just got started. Zoro huffed. Then what do you want? Luffy tilted his head. I want to know why you're tied up. Zoro remained silent for a moment before sighing. Because Morgan's a tyrant. I stood up to him, and this is what I got. Luffy scratched his head. He didn't know much about Captain Morgan, but something about this situation didn't sit right with him. He turned back to Garp. Hey, old man. Can't you do something? Garp let out a heavy sigh. Fine, fine. I suppose it'd be a pain if the Marines had another corrupt officer screwing things up. As a vice admiral, Garp's authority overruled Captain Morgan's. With a single command, Morgan was stripped of his rank, and Zoro was set free. Now that he was no longer a prisoner, Zoro turned to Luffy. You're different from other Marines. Luffy grinned. You should join us. Zoro chuckled. I don't think so. I'm not interested in serving the government. I have my own path. Luffy was disappointed but respected Zoro's decision. They parted ways as Zoro went off to continue his journey as a swordsman, while Luffy, Kobe, and Garp resumed their Marine duties. With each step of his journey, Luffy was beginning to realize that the world wasn't as simple as he once thought. There were good Marines and bad ones, just like there were good and bad pirates. But no matter what, he was determined to become a Marine who would truly make a difference. And this was only the beginning. With Alvida defeated and Zoro freed in Shell Town, Luffy and Kobe had now fully stepped into their roles as Marines. Under Garp's command, they set out on their first real missions, tracking down pirates and delivering justice across the East Blue. Their next target was Buggy the Clown, a notorious pirate with a reputation for terrorizing small towns. Reports indicated that Buggy's crew had taken over Orange Town, plundering its resources and keeping its residents in fear. Garp, as usual, showed little interest in handling minor pirate threats himself. Instead, he pointed at Luffy and Kobe. You two go handle this. Consider it another test, he said, yawning. If you mess up, well, guess you weren't cut out for this after all. Luffy cracked his knuckles, excitement bubbling within him. All right. Let's go, Kobe. Kobe, still adjusting to the fast-paced Marine life, swallowed his nerves and followed. When they arrived in Orange Town, the streets were deserted. The people were too afraid to even step outside. Luffy and Kobe walked through the eerie silence, until they stumbled upon a group of Buggy's henchmen laughing and drinking near the town square. There they are, Kobe whispered. Luffy didn't waste any time. He strode forward and cracked his fists together. Hey! You guys are under arrest. The pirates turned, surprised to see two young Marines standing before them. One of them, a lanky swordsman, sneered. Oh yeah? And who's gonna make us? Luffy's response was immediate. A single punch to the man's face sent him flying across the street, knocking him out instantly. The other pirates froze, suddenly realizing that this wasn't an ordinary Marine recruit. Panic spread among them as Luffy and Kobe fought their way through Buggy's minions. Kobe, though not as naturally strong as Luffy, had been training under Garp and held his own well. He used quick movements to dodge attacks and delivered precise strikes to disable his opponents. Eventually, the chaos caught the attention of Buggy the Clown himself. Emerging from a nearby building, he scowled at the sight of his men sprawled across the ground. "What's all this racket? Who dares ruin my fun?" Luffy turned to face him, grinning. "You must be Buggy." Buggy's scowl deepened. "And who are you, brat?" "I'm Marine Captain Luffy. And you're going down." Buggy burst into laughter. "A Marine Captain? At your age? That's rich. Listen, kid, I don't know what kind of joke this is, but Luffy didn't let him finish. In an instant, he disappeared from view, moving faster than Buggy could track. Before Buggy could react, Luffy's haki-infused punch slammed into his gut, sending him hurtling into a nearby wall. Buggy groaned as he peeled himself off the debris, his chop-chop fruit allowing him to reassemble his body. "Haki, heh," he muttered. "Guess you're not just some rookie." Buggy retaliated, launching his dismembered limbs at Luffy with deadly precision. But Luffy, having trained with Garp for years, was far more prepared than Buggy expected. He dodged each attack effortlessly, countering with powerful strikes that wore Buggy down. Eventually, Buggy realized he was outmatched. He tried to retreat, but Kobe had already called for reinforcements. A squad of Marines stormed the town, surrounding Buggy's remaining crew. With no escape, Buggy was officially captured. The people of Orange Town cheered as Luffy and Kobe secured the pirates and prepared to transport them back to Marine headquarters. However, Luffy's excitement was short-lived. As he looked at the people, celebrating their newfound freedom, he realized something. Not every pirate was like Buggy. Not every pirate was evil. His past training had instilled in him a sense of absolute justice, but something about this mission made him wonder, was it really that simple? But there was no time for reflection. Their journey continued after dealing with Buggy. The next stop in Luffy's original timeline would have been Syrup Village, where he would have met Usopp. However, since Luffy was now a Marine, his journey took a different turn. Nobody in the Marines knew about Captain Kuro, the pirate who had faked his death and taken on the identity of Klahadore, the loyal butler of Kaya, a wealthy young girl. Without anyone uncovering the truth, Kuro's plan to inherit Kaya's fortune and kill anyone who stood in his way went unnoticed. Usopp, the village's self-proclaimed sharpshooter, was the only one who suspected something was wrong. In the original timeline, Luffy and his crew had helped him fight off Kuro and the Black Cat pirates. But now? There was no Luffy. No one came to help. And when the night of Kuro's attack arrived, Usopp stood alone. Despite his courage, he was no match for Kuro's speed and lethality. The Black Cat pirates descended upon Syrup Village, and though Usopp fought with everything he had to protect Kaya, he was ultimately defeated and killed. Kaya's fate was sealed, her wealth now belonged to Kuro, and the village, unaware of the conspiracy, never knew the truth. Luffy and Kobe had no idea what had transpired. They simply continued their marine duties, never setting foot in Syrup Village. In another life, Luffy's journey would have led him to the floating restaurant Barity, where he would have met Sanji, the cook who later became his crewmate. However, as a Marine, Luffy had no reason to visit the restaurant. Instead, the events at Barity played out much as they did in the original story, except without Luffy's involvement. Don Krieg, the ruthless pirate known for his deception and overwhelming firepower, still made his attack on the Barity. But just as in the original timeline, Dracul Mihawk, the world's greatest swordsman, was in the area. Mihawk, uninterested in Krieg's ambitions, casually dismantled his fleet with ease. Sanji still fought to protect the restaurant alongside his mentor, Zeph, but without Luffy there to recruit him, Sanji remained at Barity, never setting foot on the Grand Line. Luffy, Kobe, and their fellow Marines continued their missions, unaware of the connections they had never made. Though Luffy's journey was progressing differently, his strength and reputation as a Marine were growing rapidly. With each pirate he took down, the world began to recognize his unorthodox but effective approach to justice. However, he was starting to notice that not every Marine operated with the same moral code. Some were strict enforcers of the law, while others abused their power for their own gain. Still, Luffy remained steadfast in his belief that he could make a difference. The Grand Line was on the horizon, and soon, he would find himself facing challenges far greater than anything he had encountered so far. But one thing was certain, his journey was far from over. After months of successful missions across the East, Blue, Luffy, Kobe, and the rest of their Marine squad had gained a strong reputation. Their successes had not gone unnoticed by the higher-ups, and they soon received orders for their first major assignment in the Grand Line, the mission to capture Crocodile, one of the infamous 7 warlords of the sea, who was secretly manipulating the Kingdom of Alabasta. Vice Admiral Garp, recognizing the importance of the mission, sent Luffy and Kobe under the command of Commodore Smoker, a Marine known for his no-nonsense attitude and absolute dedication to justice. Unlike most Marines, Smoker was not blindly loyal to the world government. He pursued true justice, which made him someone Luffy could respect. Their orders were clear: capture Crocodile and dismantle his criminal organization, Baroque Works. Upon arriving in Nanohana, a port city in Alabasta, Luffy, Kobe, and Smoker quickly learned about the civil war brewing within the kingdom. Crocodile, under the guise of being a hero to the people, had secretly orchestrated the conflict by controlling the Baroque Works agents. His ultimate goal was to seize the throne by overthrowing King Cobra. Luffy was disturbed by the suffering he saw in the country. The people were starving, the land was dry, and the once prosperous kingdom was on the brink of collapse. He clenched his fists. "We have to stop this." Smoker crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. "We will. But don't let your emotions cloud your duty." Kobe, though nervous about facing such a powerful opponent, nodded in agreement. "Luffy's right. This isn't just about capturing a criminal, it's about saving an entire country." Their first objective was to track down Princess Vivi, the rightful heir to Alabasta's throne, who had gone into hiding while trying to stop Crocodile herself. With the help of Marine intelligence, they discovered that she was on her way to Rain Base, the city where Crocodile had established his base of operations. Luffy, Kobe, and Smoker arrived in Rain Base under cover of night. They knew Crocodile was expecting them, and sure enough, Baroque Works agents were already waiting. The battle erupted immediately. Baroque Works operatives attacked from the shadows, attempting to ambush the Marines before they could reach Crocodile's casino, Rain Dinners. Smoker took the lead, using his Moku Moku no Mi, Plume Plume Fruit, abilities to overwhelm the lower-ranked members. Kobe, still developing his combat skills, focused on assisting their squad by taking down smaller threats. Luffy, on the other hand, rushed straight for Crocodile. The two clashed in the heart of the casino, where Crocodile, smug as ever, mocked Luffy for being a naive Marine. "You think the world government cares about saving this kingdom?" Crocodile sneered, dodging Luffy's first punch with ease. "They only care about maintaining their grip on power. You're just a pawn in their game." Luffy's glare hardened. "I don't care what they think. I'm here to stop you." Crocodile smirked and counterattacked with his sand-based devil fruit abilities. He attempted to dehydrate Luffy on the spot, but Luffy's intense training had prepared him for stronger opponents. Using his armament haki, he managed to strike Crocodile directly, a feat few could accomplish. The battle was fierce. Crocodile was faster and more experienced, but Luffy was relentless and adaptable. Every time Crocodile tried to slip away into the sand, Luffy would use his haki-enhanced attacks to counter him. Meanwhile, Smoker and Kobe were engaged in a heated battle with Mr. One, Daz Bones, and the remaining elite Baroque Works agents. Smoker's Logia powers gave him an advantage, but Kobe had to rely on his speed and tactical thinking to outmaneuver his opponents. As the battle raged on, Princess Vivi arrived with King Cobra, revealing the full extent of Crocodile's deception to the people. The soldiers of Alabasta, realizing they had been manipulated, turned against Baroque Works. With the entire kingdom rising up against him, Crocodile knew his plan had failed. In a final desperate move, he tried to unleash the full power of his devil fruit by destroying Alubana, the capital city. But Luffy wouldn't let that happen. Summoning all of his strength, Luffy delivered a devastating punch, infused with advanced armament haki, shattering Crocodile's defenses and sending him crashing into the remains of Rain Dinners. The warlord was defeated. With Crocodile incapacitated, Smoker officially placed him under arrest. Baroque Works was dismantled, and Alabasta was finally free from his grasp. The Marines secured the kingdom, and the government prepared to send in reinforcements to take full control of the situation. However, there was one final complication: Nico Robin. Robin, Crocodile's second-in-command, was a wanted criminal with a massive bounty. She was a direct target of the world government, and if captured, she would likely be executed. Luffy, standing over her as she lay injured from the battle, saw something in her eyes, a quiet resignation, a deep loneliness. She wasn't like Crocodile. He could feel it. Kobe hesitated. Luffy, she's a wanted criminal. Luffy clenched his fists. I know. Robin looked up at him, a small, knowing smile on her face. You're not like the other Marines, are you? Luffy sighed, then turned away. Go. Robin's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't waste the opportunity. She slipped into the shadows, disappearing before the reinforcements could arrive. Kobe watched in stunned silence. Luffy, you just let her go. Luffy's expression was unreadable. Not everyone we're told to capture is a bad person. Smoker, who had witnessed the entire exchange, said nothing. He simply exhaled a puff of smoke and turned away. Do what you want. But next time, if she's an enemy, I won't turn a blind eye. Luffy nodded. He understood the risks. But in his heart, he knew he had done the right thing. The defeat of Crocodile sent shockwaves through the world. A warlord of the sea had been taken down, not by another pirate, but by a marine recruit. The world government couldn't ignore Luffy's accomplishments. Despite his reckless nature, his actions had secured an entire kingdom, and the news spread quickly. The people of Alabasta hailed him as a hero. When Luffy and Kobe returned to Marineford, Garp was waiting for them, his arms crossed and a wide grin on his face. You did good, brat. Luffy smiled. Thanks, old man. Smoker, however, was less impressed. You're reckless. But you get the job done. Just don't make a habit of disobeying orders. Not long after their return, Luffy was officially promoted to Marine Captain. For Kobe, this moment was inspiring. Luffy had started out just like him, and now, he had risen to a rank that most Marines took years to reach. For Luffy, though, the promotion wasn't what mattered. What mattered was that he had made a difference. And he knew this was only the beginning. Luffy had always believed in justice. From the moment he had chosen to follow in Garp's footsteps and become a Marine, he had envisioned himself as a force for good in the world, someone who could protect the innocent and ensure that evil was punished. But Marineford changed everything. The war against Whitebeard's crew, meant to be a show of Marine strength, would instead become a defining moment in Luffy's life, one that would shake his very belief in the organization he had devoted himself to. When Portgas Ace, Luffy's brother, was captured by the world government, Marineford was turned into a battlefield. The Whitebeard pirates had come to rescue Ace, launching an all-out attack against the Marines in an attempt to break through their defenses. As a newly promoted Marine captain, Luffy was stationed on the front lines. He was no longer the rookie who had first set out with Garp. He had earned his place through his victories against Crocodile, the Buggy Pirates, and numerous other threats. But this was different. This wasn't just another battle against pirates. This was a war. Luffy stood among thousands of fellow Marines, watching as Whitebeard, the strongest man in the world, led his forces onto the battlefield. His presence alone was enough to shake the earth. Gyararara. I've come to get my son back, Whitebeard roared, his conqueror's haki sending waves of energy across the battlefield. Luffy tightened his fists. He had always respected Whitebeard's strength, but now, they were on opposite sides. He had no choice but to fight. The war erupted into chaos. Luffy charged into battle, leading his squad of Marines against Whitebeard's forces. He moved through the battlefield with incredible speed, his mastery of haki allowing him to counter even the most powerful attacks. He took down several high-ranking Whitebeard commanders, his reputation as a formidable Marine growing with every strike. Yet, despite his efforts, the Whitebeard pirates refused to back down. They weren't just fighting for power or territory, they were fighting for Ace, a man they considered family. And that made them dangerous. At one point, Luffy clashed with Mako the Phoenix, one of Whitebeard's strongest commanders. Mako, using his mythical Zoan Devil Fruit, healed from every blow Luffy landed. You're strong, kid, Mako admitted as he dodged Luffy's haki-infused punch. But are you really fighting for justice? Luffy's expression darkened. I'm fighting to protect people. Mako shook his head. Then why are you standing with the ones who want to execute your own brother? Luffy hesitated. Just for a moment. And in that moment, Marco sent him flying with a powerful kick, knocking him into the wreckage of a marine tower. As the battle raged on, the Marines prepared for Ace's execution. Despite Whitebeard's overwhelming power, the world government was determined to end this war on their terms. Luffy fought his way back to the execution platform, his body battered and bruised. He pushed forward, fighting through waves of enemies to reach his brother. But then, do it! The executioners brought their swords down. Time seemed to stop. Luffy's eyes widened in horror as two blades pierced Ace's chest. His world shattered. A scream ripped from his throat as he tried to rush forward, but before he could reach Ace, a force held him back. It was Garp. The old Marine, usually so carefree, had tears in his eyes as he grabbed Luffy by the shoulders. Don't do it, Luffy," he whispered, his voice filled with sorrow. Luffy struggled, his body trembling with rage and grief. "Let me go." Garp's grip tightened. "You can't save him. It's over." Ace's body collapsed onto the execution platform. Silence fell over the battlefield. And then, Whitebeard roared in fury, launching himself at the Marines with unrestrained rage. The war escalated into pure chaos, but Luffy barely noticed. His brother was dead. Everything felt meaningless despite the Marines' victory. The war had left scars on both sides. Whitebeard was killed by Blackbeard, who stole his devil fruit powers, and the world was forever changed. Luffy, however, felt nothing but emptiness. Back at Marineford, the celebrations felt hollow. The Marines had won, but at what cost? Luffy sat alone in his quarters, staring at the floor. Kobe knocked on the door. "Luffy, are you okay?" Luffy didn't respond. Kobe hesitated before stepping inside. I know this must be hard for you. But Ace was a pirate. The government." "Shut up." Kobe flinched. Luffy's fists clenched. "I don't care what the government says. Ace wasn't evil. He didn't deserve to die." Kobe swallowed hard. "I know." Luffy's shoulders trembled. "Then why did we let it happen?" Neither of them had an answer. That night, Luffy thought about everything. He had been raised to believe that the Marines were a force for good. That they were the protectors of the world. But now, he wasn't sure anymore. He had seen Marines who killed without hesitation, who enjoyed inflicting suffering on their enemies. He had seen innocents caught in the crossfire, deemed as acceptable casualties in the pursuit of justice. And worst of all, he had seen the government order the execution of his own brother, knowing full well what it meant to the world. He realized something terrifying. Not all Marines were good. And not all pirates were bad. A few weeks after the war, Garp came to see him. Luffy sat on the edge of the Marineford docks, staring at the ocean. Garp sat beside him, hands resting on his knees. "You're struggling, aren't you?" Garp said. Luffy didn't answer. Garp sighed. "I get it. The war, it changes people." Luffy turned to him, his expression filled with anger and pain. "Was this really justice, Grandpa?" Garp was silent. Luffy clenched his fists. "I don't know if I can do this anymore." Garp finally spoke. "There's another way." Luffy blinked. "What?" Garp looked him in the eyes. "The Marines aren't perfect. But there's a faction within them, one that operates outside the government's control. They do what's right, not what's ordered." Luffy narrowed his eyes. "What are you saying?" Garp smirked. "I'm saying, it's time you met Sword." Sword was an elite secret faction within the Marines, a group of officers who acted independently, taking down threats the world government ignored. They had no loyalty to the bureaucracy. No blind obedience to orders. They fought for true justice. And for the first time since Marineford, Luffy felt a sense of purpose. He didn't want to abandon everything he had worked for. He didn't want to become a pirate. But he couldn't stand by and let innocent people suffer in the name of justice anymore. So he made his choice. Luffy joined Sword. And with that decision, his real mission began. After the devastating Marineford War, Luffy's perspective on the Marines had changed forever. He no longer saw the organization as purely good, nor did he believe that every pirate was evil. His loyalty was now to Sword, the secret faction within the Marines that operated outside the world government's control. But despite his doubts about the system, Luffy remained a Marine. He still wanted to protect innocent people and fight against those who exploited the weak. His next mission would test this belief like never before. The target? Don Quixote Doflamingo, one of the 7 warlords of the sea and the ruler of Dressrosa, a man whose crimes were hidden beneath the surface of political power. Luffy had been assigned to accompany Admiral Fujitora to Dressrosa under the pretense of maintaining order. However, Luffy knew that Fujitora didn't trust Doflamingo any more than he did. Unlike other admirals, Fujitora had a strong moral compass. He wasn't blindly loyal to the world government and had even openly criticized the warlord system. Luffy respected that. Upon arriving in Dressrosa, the truth became clear. The entire kingdom was under Doflamingo's control. The people worshipped him as a hero, but behind the scenes, he was enslaving citizens, running an underground arms trade, and using devil fruit experiments to strengthen his forces. The worst part? He was turning people into living toys, stripping them of their identities and forcing them into lifetimes of servitude. This guy's worse than I thought, Luffy muttered, watching as citizens unknowingly walked past their own missing loved ones, who had been transformed into toys and forgotten. Fujitora, standing beside him, sighed. This isn't justice. Luffy cracked his knuckles. Then let's put an end to it. Luffy didn't waste time. He stormed the royal palace, confronting Doflamingo directly. The warlord greeted him with an amused grin. My, a marine captain with no sense of restraint. You must be Garp's grandson. Luffy ignored the taunt. You're done, Doflamingo. Doflamingo laughed. Oh? And what exactly are you going to do? Arrest me? The world government protects me, boy. Luffy's fists clenched. He had seen firsthand how the government turned a blind eye to corruption. But that wasn't going to stop him. You think the Marines will save you? Luffy growled. They won't. Doflamingo's smile faded. Then let's see if you're strong enough to take me down. The battle shook the entire kingdom. Doflamingo, wielding the power of the string fruit, unleashed deadly waves of razor-sharp threads, slicing through buildings with ease. His parasite technique allowed him to control people like puppets, forcing innocent civilians to attack Luffy. But Luffy had grown stronger since Marineford. Dodging the attacks, he activated armament haki, his fists clashing against Doflamingo's strings with explosive force. The battle raged across the city, until finally, Luffy unlocked Gear 4th. His body expanded, covered in haki-infused muscle, and with a final, devastating King Kong gun, he sent Doflamingo crashing into the streets below, breaking the underground empire once and for all. With Doflamingo defeated, Fujitora took over, ensuring that Dressrosa was freed from his control. But Luffy's work wasn't over yet. In the aftermath of Doflamingo's defeat, Marines investigating his underground dealings uncovered something even more disturbing, evidence of illegal human experiments being conducted on Punk Hazard. The name that kept appearing in the reports? Caesar Clown. Caesar was a rogue scientist who had once worked for Dr. Vegapunk, but he had since turned to inhumane experiments, including creating massive artificial giants, chemical weapons, and deadly toxins. Luffy knew they couldn't ignore this. Sword, acting under secret orders, assembled a team to raid Punk Hazard and shut down Caesar's operations for good. Unlike Dressrosa, Punk Hazard wasn't a city, it was a research facility turned wasteland, half of it covered in blazing fire, the other half frozen solid due to a past battle between Admirals Akainu and Aokiji. Luffy, Kobe, and a squad of elite sword members landed on the island, immediately encountering horrific sights, children who had been experimented on, giant artificial life forms, and chemical weapons so deadly they could wipe out entire islands. This is sick, Kobe whispered, horrified. Luffy nodded. We stop this. Now. As they moved deeper into the facility, they encountered Caesar's personal guards, elite warriors enhanced by experimental drugs. Luffy led the charge, tearing through dozens of guards, while Kobe and the others secured the hostages. And then, they finally found him. Caesar Clown. The twisted scientist giggled as he hovered in the air, his gas fruit allowing him to transform into poisonous vapors. You Marines always ruin everything, Caesar sneered. But you're too late. My experiments are already in motion. Luffy didn't care. He launched forward, dodging Caesar's toxic attacks and delivering a devastating haki punch that sent the scientist crashing into his own lab equipment. The battle was over in minutes. With Caesar captured, the entire facility was raided, its research destroyed, and its prisoners freed. Luffy looked at the rescued children, some of them barely old enough to understand what had been done to them. He made a vow right then. I won't let the government cover this up. For once, he was relieved to be part of SWORD, because they weren't afraid to do what was right, even when it meant defying the world government's orders. When Luffy and his team returned from Punk Hazard, word of his success spread quickly. The world government tried to control the narrative, insisting that the capture of Doflamingo and Caesar Clown was a standard marine operation. But those who knew the truth understood, it was Luffy and SWORD who had made it possible. Luffy was hailed as a hero by some and a dangerous wildcard by others. His influence within the Marines was growing. He was no longer just Garp's grandson, he was a force to be reckoned with. And the higher-ups knew it. One day, Fleet Admiral Sakazuki, Akainu, called for him. You've made a name for yourself, boy, Akainu said, his expression unreadable. But be careful. Not everyone in the government likes what you're doing. Luffy met his gaze. I don't care what they think. I'll keep doing what's right. Akainu studied him for a long moment before smirking. HMPH. Just like your grandfather. And with that, Luffy was sent on his next mission. He didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. He wasn't just a marine anymore. He was a warrior of justice. And he wasn't going to stop until the world changed. Luffy had faced many challenges as a marine, but his mission in Wano was one of the most difficult yet, not because of the enemies he faced, but because he wasn't allowed to act. After dismantling Doflamingo's criminal empire and taking down Caesar Clown, SWORD received intelligence about Wano country, a closed-off land ruled by the tyrannical Emperor Kaido. Unlike other regions in the world, Wano was not under the world government's control, which meant that the Marines technically had no jurisdiction there. However, reports indicated that Kaido was using Wano as a base for illegal arms manufacturing and human experiments, much like what Luffy had seen in Dressrosa and Punk Hazard. The intelligence was alarming, but the Marines refused to interfere. We can't afford an open war with an emperor, the higher-ups argued. Despite this, SWORD devised a plan to send undercover agents into Wano, gathering intelligence on Kaido's operations. And Luffy volunteered. Luffy entered Wano under the disguise of a wandering samurai, blending in with the locals. He quickly saw the suffering of the people, starving citizens, polluted water, and entire villages wiped out by Kaido's forces. The land had once been prosperous, but now, it was a living hell for those who opposed the beast pirates. Though he wanted to take action immediately, Luffy knew he had to be careful. Attacking Kaido without the backing of the Marines would be suicide. He met with X-Drake, another SWORD operative who had infiltrated Kaido's crew. You need to be patient, Luffy, Drake warned. We're not strong enough to take Kaido down alone. Luffy gritted his teeth. Then what's the point of being here? To gather intel, Drake replied. Kaido is working with the world government's secret agents, CP0. If we can expose that connection, we might be able to convince the higher-ups to act. Luffy hated it. He hated seeing people suffer while he stood by and did nothing. But he had no choice. 4 months, he worked in the shadows, watching Kaido's brutality unfold. He saw the cruel treatment of prisoners in Udon, the inhumane experiments using smile fruits, and the forced labor that kept Kaido's army growing stronger. At one point, Luffy even encountered Trafalgar Law, a pirate captain who had allied with the rebellion in Wano. You don't belong here, Marine, Law said, eyes filled with distrust. Luffy sighed. I just want to stop Kaido. Law studied him for a long moment. Then why aren't you fighting? Luffy clenched his fists. Because if I attack him, the Marines won't back me up. Law smirked. So much for justice. Luffy had no response. Luffy remained in Wano for nearly a year, but no reinforcements ever came. Eventually, after Kaido's deal with CP0 collapsed, the Marines ordered all undercover agents to withdraw. Luffy was furious. We're just going to leave these people to suffer? Drake sighed. We don't have a choice. It was one of the hardest decisions Luffy ever made, but he obeyed orders. As he sailed away from Wano, he made a vow. One day, I'll be strong enough to make my own decisions. One day, I won't have to wait for permission to do what's right. Not long after leaving Wano, Luffy received devastating news. Kobe had been kidnapped by the Blackbeard pirates. Kobe had been on a mission to capture a dangerous pirate when Blackbeard's crew ambushed his ship, taking him hostage. Upon hearing this, Garp immediately took action, assembling a team of sword members to storm Blackbeard's territory and rescue Kobe. And Luffy went with him. Blackbeard's base of operations was Hashinosu, also known as Pirate Island, a lawless land where only the strongest survived. Garp and his fleet launched a direct assault, crashing into the island with overwhelming force. As soon as they arrived, Garp shook the entire island with his monstrous haki, sending dozens of Blackbeard's subordinates flying. Luffy fought alongside him, tearing through Blackbeard's commanders with ease. Eventually, they found Kobe locked in a cell, battered but still determined. "You guys actually came," Kobe muttered, smiling despite his injuries. Luffy smirked. "Of course we did." However, before they could escape, the Blackbeard pirates retaliated. As Luffy and Kobe fought their way back to the ship, Blackbeard's strongest commanders arrived. Luffy and Garp held them off, but they were outnumbered. At some point, Garp turned to Luffy. "Take Kobe and go." Luffy froze. "What? No. We're not leaving you." Garp smiled. "You're the future of the Marines, Luffy. You and Kobe. You have to survive." Luffy didn't want to go, but Garp forced him to retreat, using his Conqueror's haki to push Luffy and the others toward the escape route. As the ship sailed away, Luffy watched his grandfather disappear into the chaos, fighting alone against Blackbeard's forces. It was the second time in his life he had lost someone important to him. And this time, he could do nothing about it. After Garp's disappearance, Luffy dedicated himself to becoming stronger than ever before. 4 years, he trained relentlessly, honing his haki to new levels and mastering techniques that even admirals struggled with. By his mid-20s, he was considered one of the strongest Marines in history. Eventually, the world government offered him the rank of admiral. At first, he hesitated. He didn't trust the system. But then, he remembered what Garp had said. "You're the future of the Marines." If he wanted to change things from the inside, he needed power. So he accepted. As an admiral, Luffy became known as one of the most unpredictable Marines ever. He refused to follow corrupt orders, he protected innocent people no matter what, and he even clashed with other admirals when they crossed the line. Some within the world government saw him as a threat, but others saw him as a hero. Despite the challenges ahead, Luffy knew one thing. He wasn't just a Marine anymore. He was a force for true justice. And he was just getting started. Luffy's journey from Marine recruit to Admiral had been filled with loss, hardship, and difficult choices. But through it all, he had remained true to himself. Now, standing at the peak of the Marines, he would make sure no one else had to suffer like he did. And maybe, just maybe, he would change the world.